We are on a freight train to the end of history. And that's good news. Yes, there's a whole lot of dystopian and ominous things that are taking place and transpiring before our eyes that we never thought possible. And this series is an update on all of those prophetic harbingers of Christ's soon coming.
Go into family homes, like in some of these, when we're going into some of these homes, and we have to separate an individual to isolate them.
COVID-19 Emergency Response Act 2020, it has a provision for the removal of children and may, in doing so, use such force as is reasonably necessary. So officer discretion, removing children, using force as necessary into quarantine facilities.
Well, new data from Doctors Hospital shows that there's a recent spike in cases of a highly contagious skin infection known as impetigo, which mainly affects children.
The spike being attributed to kids wearing masks at school. Fox 54's Mary Klingler joins us live in studio with safety tips on how to protect your children from the highly contagious infection and what to do if they get it. Good evening, Mary.
Good evening, Mark. Yeah, just think of all the surfaces that you've touched today, and then think of the surfaces your child touched at school today. Really, there's no way of knowing. Whether they're cloth or disposable, wearing masks more often means dealing with a different problem for kids, impetigo.
Yeah, in a way, the mask can protect you, but if the person wearing the mask already has it, the humidity under the mask can make the bacteria grow more.
While a mask can help provide a layer of protection from the coronavirus, the facial coverings can cause a different type of problem. With kids returning to school, local doctors say children are at a heightened risk of contracting impetigo.
Putting them inside their own little enclosure there, and doesn't that just make your heart break? When I look at these kids and they've got their masks on and they're cordoned off from their teacher, from their peers, and these ones too playing in these little pens like animals. In France, they were told when you're on the playground, again, outdoors, stay in your play square. And some people look at this and they laugh because it's so dissonant and insane. But I just want to weep for these children, for this generation. So this is a second positive trend that so many people are moving out of the cities. Look at this. Workers can live anywhere. Many ask, why do I live here? Many people are saying, why in the world do I live in this crowded environment when there is so much beauty and peace and joy in the country? Yes, hardships, but hey, guess what? There's joy in the hardships. So if you're considering country living, oh, I don't think I could do it, join the club. But that's a good thing when we face hardships. Not biting off more than we can chew, but one step at a time, and God will show us the way. So you get the idea. Out of the cities, safer, and hopefully we can all become more spiritually connected in that context.
You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you? No right not to be vaccinated, meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm.
Now, that's not just a comment by any old person. This is one of the most well-known constitutional attorneys in America, Alan Dershowitz, and vaccinate you forcibly. Now, keep in mind that the Bible calls the body the temple of the living God. So what a human being chooses to put in their body or not put in their body is a matter of conscience, because that's a religious thing, your body being the temple of the living God. So the idea that the state would have jurisdiction over conscience to overrule any individual's choice to vaccinate or not vaccinate is a concept that is totally contrary to the principle of free exercise of religion, freedom of conscience, enshrined in the First Amendment. And of course, the key doctrine in medical practice is called informed consent. You never do a treatment on a patient or put something in their body without their consent. And of course, they also ought to be informed as well. Forced vaccinations, and I was like, that's the number one frontline ground zero issue of freedom of conscience and religious liberty in our day. This one kind of took second place. In a normal year, this would be insane, massive, and the couple of things I'm about to show you. But this is 2020. These are the last days. So don't let this become less significant. Attendees must register with the government. Is this a communist state? Or face closure and jail?
If the religious leaders do not agree to abide by these rules, then we will close the religious institutions, period.
Imagine a time in Earth's history where you would have the state coming in and saying, we're going to put all of your church attendees in jail for a year and close your church down because you held services when we said you may not. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And of course, not just Congress, but the states too, because the 14th Amendment has taken all the Bill of Rights and made sure that even state governments and local governments may not infringe upon these cherished, precious freedoms. I mean, we're like back in the Dark Ages when we're looking at persecution of the free exercise of religion here in our day. And you might say, oh, that's so defiant and that's so rebellious. I'll tell you something, my friends. If we're not willing to obey God rather than men, then we are being rebellious. When you obey God, you are being obedient. And if it puts you in conflict with man or with the powers of man or with the, quote, health authorities or the governors of this world, there comes a time where disobedience to them is obedience to God. And who do we want to obey if they have to come into conflict? I'm with Peter and John. You judge for yourselves whether it is right in Acts 5 that we obey God rather than man. That is what men and women fought and died for during the Revolutionary War, that we wouldn't have the church being mandated by the state on how we worship God, where we worship God, what time, what manner. It's well said. And those three branches, the judicial, the legislative, the executive, are meant to check and balance each other. Also various levels of government, federal government, state government, county governments. The county sheriffs are part of that system of checks and balances. And when you have a governor that is defying the Constitution, it is their duty, their responsibility to be sure to enforce the law, the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. And there are dozens of sheriffs doing the same thing. It's not just these three that I mentioned here. Many, many places in the country they have said this is not acceptable. And by the way, the courts also are starting to weigh in. As of October 2020 here, Michigan's Supreme Court has said Governor Whitmer's executive orders and shutdowns and lockdowns were absolutely unconstitutional, and they have nullified them, just like these sheriffs previously had. But now it's official statewide. This was up in Idaho, ironically in a town called Moscow, Idaho. This is very a communist tactic to say we're going to prohibit the exercise of religion. And these churchgoers said, we're going to go out in the outdoors and sing hymns. And we know that the state has said that you must be 6 feet apart and wearing masks outdoors. But we believe it is our conscience to uphold the freedom of religion, and social distancing and mask wearing is a matter of individual conscience and choice, and we're going to go ahead and do it. And they did get citations, and several of them arrested.
These are not contrasts. These are similar. The contrast is that they're on other opposite sides of the country. Venice Beach, in Venice Beach, California, a picture of a bulldozer that's filling a skateboard park with sand on the beach to make sure that kids don't use it. And here's another picture. This one is in New York City. This is at the behest of Mayor de Blasio. City workers are welding shut the gates of a public park. Dr. Atlas, what do you make of Venice Beach and the park being shut in New York?
Yeah, well, there's two just really inexplicable thought processes going on there. One is that somehow people seem to think that in leadership positions that it makes sense to be confined indoors rather than be out of doors. You don't have to be a doctor to understand that that is just completely ludicrous. And then when you look at the data, even the original data out of Japan, they showed that the transmission rates were far higher, by order of magnitude higher, inside, in confined spaces. Outdoors is far, far lower risk to get a contagious disease. This is just common sense. I don't even know how to explain how that is so ridiculous. But the second part is locking children's playgrounds. Again, we go back to the fact These are people, these leaders insist that, quote, it's all about the science, but they're doing things that are contrary to the science because there is virtually no risk to the people who would use those playgrounds. The children have almost no risk. In fact, I'll give you a quote from the JAMA Pediatrics Journal.
JAMA is the
Journal of the AMA Pediatrics. It's a special pediatrics journal. And their quote is, and this was a series of 48 pediatric hospitals in North America. And their quote is, the risk of a serious illness from seasonal influenza in children is, quote, far greater than the risk of serious illness from COVID-19 in children. So, I mean, this is a completely irrational response. To lock down the playgrounds is just, I mean, it defies any science whatsoever.
One of the main factors or components that's going to come out of this downturn that we're going into, or this crisis, is the government is not going to let it go to waste. And I think they're going to come up with, well, they've already come up with a digital U.S. currency. That seed has been planted. But I think they're most likely going to use this crisis as an opportunity to implement a government-backed digital currency and ban cash. So personal liberties and restrictions. And if you think it through, they could control that, because every single merchant would have to be set up under the same system. It would have a serial number. So the system that the merchant is set up with would be able to monitor that serial number and control what you buy and what you sell. Think that one through.
Global digital currency controlled by states in different ways. What do you think about that idea? Is there a possibility of that occurring, and how much of that is a risk versus, say, a national digital currency?
I definitely think it's a possibility because, to your point, it gives governments so much control.
So what are we doing to kids? What is the CDC recommending for schools? This is what they recommended this summer. I'm not going to take you through the whole document. I will highlight some of the lowlights, really, of this, where they said if schools are going to open safely, this is how we must do it. I would say this is what we must subject your children to. First of all, the CDC suggested, of course, playgrounds must be closed. Children must be kept indoors in enclosures with masks on all day or in front of screens in virtual school. Masks, of course, should be worn by children over the age of 2. 3-year-olds in the little daycare, Head Start, preschool settings, putting masks and requiring them to wear them all day. Give the children daily health and temperature checks. Desks 6 feet apart, all facing the same way. On school buses, 1 child per seat. Skip rows. When I visited Vietnam when I was in college, it's a communist country, a socialist country, and I saw the students at the school from the other side of the fence. This sounds very communist, how regimented this is. 1 child per seat, skip rows, all facing the same way, desks 6 feet apart.
This is why we should open the schools, because there is virtually zero risk of death and virtually zero risk of a serious illness in children. This is the fact. This is inarguable. This is proven not only every country outside the United States, but by our own data in the CDC itself. Iceland, Australia, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Asian countries. There is a minimal, if any, risk of children transmitting the disease, even to their parents. It's not just that children are not at risk at all from this disease. They also do not even transmit the disease. It is literally irrational to not only close schools.
So the teachers wouldn't be at risk either. The fifth grade teacher, 6th grade teacher, kindergarten teacher, they won't be at risk either?
Okay, there's not a significant risk, but I want to qualify that. Okay, let's look at who the teachers are in K-12 schools in the United States. Half of them are 41 years old or younger. Okay, 82% are under 55. The risk from COVID-19 for people under 60 is less than or equal to seasonal influenza. So if you're going to shut down the schools because you're worried about the rare teacher who's at a high risk category, you must necessarily close the schools from November through April because they're at the same risk in flu season. Now, that's point number one. Point number two is, besides that teachers are relatively young, if there are high-risk teachers, we don't want to put a high-risk teacher in a risky environment. No one wants to do that. Even if the children could transmit the disease, and it's not impossible, but it's less likely, even when they could, we know how to socially isolate. Don't you think that teachers by now understand what 6-foot distancing is, understand they can wear a mask? And if they're still afraid, if they still find it impossible to do social distancing that they've been doing for the last 3 months, if they still think it's impossible, they can teach from a distance. They've been doing that now. Instead of shutting down schools, in my way of thinking from the data, if you're shutting down schools, you do not care about the children, because it's very critical to, beyond the fact that they're not at risk, to understand something very important, the harms of closing the schools.
Right.
And this is really a big topic and no one's talking about it. We know from the data already, it's a fallacy to think that online education in K through 12 is even remotely, no pun intended, like the quality of education kids get. First of all, in learning itself, 50% of children in the Boston area are not even logging in when they're supposedly in session. There's already been an estimated 30% loss in reading skills for young children with this online model. And one of my emails recently came from an emergency room doctor at Children's Hospital in Michigan, who told me that the serious child abuse emergency room visits are up 35% during the lockdown. Now, let me tell you what that means. This is very important. Somebody who brings in their child to the emergency room, that's not because they smacked them around and gave them a black eye. These are, and I'm saying this with sadness, these emergency room visits are for children who the parents think they might have killed them. They're unresponsive. They have multiple broken bones. These are the most serious 35% increase in child abuse, and that's directly due to the lockdown, and I'll explain why. Because when you lose your job, the correlation of amount of child abuse found in a home is directly correlated for lower socioeconomic group, unemployment, alcohol abuse. This is markedly increasing during the lockdown when we know that almost half of people making $40,000 a year or less lost their jobs, by far more than people like you and I. And so when these people have children and the schools are closed and there's a tremendous amount of stress in the household, we know the emergency room visits are going way up.
Number 6, I've got 15 of these. The worst 15 items on the CDC recommendations for how to open up schools. In hallways, have tape on the ground for one-way traffic. Keep students 6 feet apart at all times. No sharing of any items or supplies. All belongings can be stored in a student's individual labeled container or cubby. If items must be shared, sanitize between use. Yes, this is good for character development. No sharing allowed. Limit any non-essential visitors or volunteers, and of course that one would most logically and naturally be aimed at the parents, who are the most inclined and likely to visit the school, visit their children. We do not want parents coming. Non-essential, they are non-essential parents. No field trips. Go virtual. Field trips, that's like the best thing. No student assemblies. And for Christian schools, this would include chapel. So we're going to do it all virtual, everything. Life is virtual now. I mean, everything I talked about in the media mind, just multiply it by 10, and you've got the world we live in 2020. Performances, go virtual. No parent-teacher conferences, go virtual. For young children, no switching teachers during the day. So this would apparently, for the young children, eliminate art, PE, music, these well-rounded things that really help brain development for children, help them learn their academics better, help them become fully human. Oh, no, we can't have that. Regular announcements on video and through the PA system about how to stop the spread of COVID-19. Very dystopian feel to that. And of course, since we are what I would call messing with children's mental and physical health so badly, I would call this child abuse, this list of things. But since we're putting them through all of this, consider posting signages for the National Distress Hotline. 1-800 so on, or text that number. These are interesting times in which we live. Sad, tragic. It's never been a better time to homeschool, right? Praise God for homeschools or schools of the prophets who are pushing against this and saying, no, we're going to protect our children against this assault of the enemy. Authorities, I have to put those in quotes when we say health authorities. Public health authorities. Translation, public. People who claim to represent the interests of the public and are well endowed and paid by Gates Foundation and Big Pharma. That's public health. I put that one in quotes as well, because we have the true health message. We know that what they are pushing through Big Pharma is anything but health. It's a pharmaceutical industrial complex. And then public health authorities. Yes, who is the authority on our health? Is it man? No, it is God. Government has no jurisdiction over our health choices, so we must obey God rather than man. And that's not a rebellious statement. That is an obedient statement. If we don't insist on obeying God, we're rebellious against him because we're going with the flow of the culture. You have to go against the grain and swim upstream in this degenerate world in order to be a faithful child of God.
We still need people to wear the mask in public. We still need people to keep social distance and isolation. But Ryan, the one thing I want to try to get across today is we need to do that when we're in our homes also.
And he's not the only one that says we need to wear masks in our homes also. Dr. Deborah Birx says Americans may have to start wearing masks inside their own homes, even when nobody's around. Employees need masks even for at-home Zoom calls, Wisconsin government agency says. So they said when you're doing a Zoom call, when you're doing a conference call online, you're in your office by yourself, you're in your bedroom or basement or wherever, and nobody else is there necessarily, you put a mask on. Because that's the new face of the new human, the new normal, the new normal, the new normal. People can't see you without your mask on. I mean, you have to prove your compliance by doing the ultimate irrational thing. Wear a mask when nobody's around in your own home office. This is a system of mind control and nothing short of that. Because when you look at other things, this was not a joke. This was a sign in the UK that gave people instructions on how to be proper pedestrians during these times. And one of them said, look away while passing other people. So don't make eye contact on the street with other people. As Christians, can we obey that? As people who've been born into the kingdom of God as a missionary, every true disciple is born into the kingdom of God as a missionary, where our gospel commission is to go ye into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And baptizing people and the washing of feet and the reaching out of the right arm of the gospel and healing, the social distancing impositions that are being brought by the public health authorities run contrary to our commission. And so, of course, we're going to make eye contact, even if we have to do it from behind a mask, which reduces the vast majority of the empathy that we can show, but at least with the eyes, to reach out and smile with the eyes and show people we care. So maybe this isn't a joke. Going out to eat with members of your household this weekend? Don't forget to keep your mask on in between bites. Do your part to keep those around you healthy. You have to have your face scanned. You see it? Their face is getting scanned to make sure they are wearing a mask and their temperature is getting checked as well. And this is going to be the new thing. We saw in CovidDystopia Volume 1, travel passports to prove not only temperature, but prove immunity, maybe an antibody test or vaccination records. That will be your travel papers. We'll get more into that during the session on COVID-1984. Portable pod for travelers concerned about catching COVID. You've got the pod for dining that people sit in. I mean, we're outdoors. Again, we have to be 10 feet apart outdoors and in a pod. Just insanity that we find. And these are... People are trying to be, creative and meet the health authorities where they're at. Here's some more designs for the new normal. This is you in a fishbowl. The new normal. This one really got my attention. Like, there were 50,000 pre-orders of these to totally put yourself in this zone of protection. Is this normal now? Is this normal? This I thought this was made up. What is that? Okay. CovidDystopia. Jesus is coming soon when mankind has lost their minds. But as we think about the children, as we think about religious liberty, as we think about forced vaccinations that are coming, let us not despair. Let us always lift up our heads, for our redemption draweth nigh. And always advocate for truth, for love, for tact. Because I know a lot of people want to get up in arms and be like, no, and have a big fight and a battle. Yes, we want to be voices for religious liberty. Yes, we want to be people who practice country living, but not to make a child of God an enemy. So never get that spirit and attitude during these contentious times of division. Every human is a child of God. Pray for them and reach out to them with the gospel while we still have time.